Welcome everyone to GamerMeld. The RTX 3080 reviews are out, and some of you may have noticed that unfortunately I didn't have a review out, and that is actually because I wasn't able to get a review unit. I honestly tried really hard to as well, and actually thought I was until right around the announcement time. And I even moved, not sure if some of you noticed here in the stream, but this is different. I moved for a bigger studio, and I did that a little early specifically for this. So I say all of that just to explain that I'm sorry. I was hoping to do a review, but of course I understand my channel is still fairly new, so hopefully next time. Luckily I should be getting a third-party card, or actually a few of them, fairly soon, but I won't have it in time for tomorrow's third-party reviews. But either way, the cards are coming out tomorrow, so I thought I'd go over the reviews and kind of give you my take on whether you should buy or not. So let's get to it. Starting things off, I will say that a lot of people are talking about the fact that Nvidia kind of exaggerated about the 3080's performance, or some people are even throwing around lied. I wouldn't necessarily go that far, but the simple fact is that the 3080 does not get 2 times the 2080. Now, the reason I say they're not really lying is because it says up to, and that 2 times the 2080 performance comes from one game. So technically it's true. It's kind of like when a store says up to 50% off. Everything's like 20, 30% off, but the only thing that's 50% off is that one little chandelier in the back that's only $10 anyway. So you could argue it's not really a lie, but it kind of is, and it's absolutely misleading. Now, with that said, the performance is definitely impressive. Starting things off, I will say that I'm mostly going to be using Tom's Hardware for this first little bit, and the reason why is because they actually do an average, and the average over multiple games, and I really like to see that. In this case, it is 9 games. And starting things off, you can see that the hardware scheduling of the 3080 actually helps here, although very little. We're looking at around 1 to 2%, so nothing huge, but free performance is free performance. And I'm mostly going to be going off of this number, but at the same time, like I said, it's not a big difference. Anyway, the average overall between the 3080 and then when we look at the 2080 Ti, it's a whopping 33.5%. Now, remember that we actually thought the 3090 was going to be around 30 to maybe 40% faster than the 2080 Ti, which was all right, almost a normal generational jump. But the fact that we're looking at the 3080 itself, that's a whopping 33.5% faster than the next tier up of last gen, that is good. Then whenever we compare it to the regular 2080, we are looking at 72.1%. So once again, not that 2 times, we are about 28% away from that 2 times number. So obviously it simply isn't true, at least overall. But once again, that's the whole up to part. Now, with that said, there is a bit of a caveat. When we move over to 1440p, now this is medium settings. I'm not sure why they didn't do ultra, but regardless, it is still 1440p. And in this case, the 3080 versus the 2080 Ti, it drops down to 18.8%. And then whenever we do the 3080 versus the 2080, it drops down to 46.7%. Once again, a very nice boost over last gen, but there's kind of an issue here. It becomes pretty apparent that at this point, the CPU is becoming the bottleneck. And as far as I could see, it looks like Tom's Hardware is using a 9900K. Now you could say that that's a bit older, but at the same time, it's a 9900K. That should be plenty for pretty much any GPU. But at this point, it does seem like things are becoming CPU limited. Now, when we move over to 1080p, and once again, this is actually Ultra. So honestly, I do believe if they had used Ultra for 1440p, there probably would have been more of a difference. But either way, even at medium settings, it is clearly becoming at least a bit CPU bottlenecked. So when we move over to Ultra, the difference between the 3080 and the 2080 Ti becomes 18.3%. So not much of a drop from 1440p. And then versus the 2080, it's 42.4%. So once again, not much of a drop, but still we're seeing a difference. And remember that this is a 9-game average, so this does matter. Now, I know some of you are going to say something like, oh, but GamerMeld, we're not going to be playing at 1080p with this. And I really don't like that argument. And the reason why is because And the reason why is because Nvidia has been announcing like 360 hertz monitors. So I mean, they're really touting high frame rate. They even did a bit of a demo at CES, and we're really trying to push that it actually makes your game better. Of course, how much of a difference it'll actually have in normal gameplay is tough to say, but regardless, they are pushing that. So the fact that you are getting bottlenecked here does matter, and the fact that we aren't, even with the 3080, we aren't seeing those really high frame rates kind of does matter, although once again, it does seem like it's because of the CPU. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. You're not going to get as much of a performance increase over the 2000 series in 1080p or even 1440p, although at medium settings. Still, at the end of the day, we are looking at a 46.7% jump versus the 2080 and even an 18.8%. Well, this is the 1440p, but it's not much of a difference between 1080p. So if you're someone who really likes to stick to 1080p, you may not see a giant difference except for in certain games. But overall, the 3080 absolutely has a huge performance increase. Next up, I want to tackle power draw, and this is something that we knew about for quite a while, long before the 3080 was even announced. And it's about as bad as most thought. As you can see in this graph, the 3080 FE in Metro Exodus at 1440p during a loop, the RTX 3080 actually got pulled a whopping 332.8 watts, which is just massive. It's actually 23.85% more than the 2080 Ti Founders Edition, and it's 52.24% more than the 2080. It's 52.24%. That's a big difference. Obviously, at 4K, the 3080 gets 72.1% is 72.1% faster than the 2080, while at the same time pulls 52.24% more from the wall. And I will say that Tom's Hardware actually has a really great way of measuring this, so I do believe it. Even when we look over here at Tech Power Up, this is just average gaming. It's still quite a bit more. And then whenever we get to peak gaming, it's pretty bad. Once again, let's go over the numbers, and this is comparing basically their loop, which I will say beyond 1440p, it's pretty much guaranteed to be using 99% at 1440p or 4K, so I highly doubt it'll be much different. But when we look at the actual average increase in score in 1440p, so this is 52.24% more power draw versus the 2080, yet it's 46.7% faster in 1440p, at least overall. So basically at 1440p, the 3080 ends up being slightly less efficient than the 2080. And this actually goes for the 2080 Ti as well. So it draws 23.85% more power versus the 2080 Ti, but yet when we look at 1440p performance, the 3080 only gets 18.8% more performance. So that's a pretty big difference in efficiency there. But at the same time, when comparing price and the difference in performance, you're still ultimately getting a much better deal, especially compared to the 2080 Ti and even versus the 2080, just because you're getting significantly more performance for the same price. And with the power draw, a lot of people actually thought that we would be seeing, a massive difference in heat, a massive difference in cooling and everything else. And while I'm not sure about the third-party cards, because those are actually going to be, the reviews for those are actually going to be releasing tomorrow, but at least for this design, clearly, Nvidia did a great job because it worked. When we go over here, you can see that while the 3080 draws significantly more power, the actual GPU RPM fan speed is lower than anything else. And it actually does that while keeping it around, I believe they said 72 degrees Celsius, which is great. And Tom's Hardware even mentioned the fact that the difference in noise was very noticeable. So the simple fact is that yes, the 3080 draws more power, but it's quieter, requires less fan speed, and keeps things very cool. That's fantastic, and definitely a testament to Nvidia's new Shroud. Next, we only have a couple more things to cover, starting with RTX and DLSS. Now, it's here that I will say I was a bit surprised. With Ampere touting such huge gains in ray tracing performance, you would think that there wouldn't be a massive drop-off when turning RTX on. Well, unfortunately, there still is. You can see right here that Tech Power Up did the 3080 with ray tracing off. It got 191.8 FPS. Then when we turn RTX on, we're looking at 145.2. Now, with that said, the 2080 Ti actually did drop more, but it's still a pretty big jump. Moving on to control, we can actually see DLSS on and off. First up, we have RTX off, which is a good 137.7 FPS. Then once we turn RTX on, it takes a massive dip, and I do believe it was actually more percentage-wise than the 2080 Ti. Of course, when you turn DLSS on, it jumps way up, so it definitely is great, but it's still kind of sad to see such a drop-off. So when it comes to ray tracing and Ampere, you're still going to have to decide if you want ray tracing on or off. There's benefits for either one. And next up, I'm going to go over overclocking. So starting things off, as we saw in a video cards article recently, there is a power limit for the Founders Edition of 370 watts. And just like that article, you're actually able to get a pretty big performance increase when it comes to memory. We're looking at 11% overclock here. Unfortunately though, when it comes to the GPU itself, at least Tech Power Up, was only able to get about a 1% overclock. And as you can see, all of this gave it about a 3.9% performance increase. But of course, that's based on Silicon Lottery and things like that. We actually saw over at Hot Hardware that it got around a 10% performance increase, which is pretty nice. So with all of that out of the way, the question becomes, is it worth it? Should you buy Nvidia's RTX 3000 series? And to answer that, I will definitely say it would help to know AMD's card, but at least compared to the RTX 2000 series and AMD's current crop of cards, yes. The RTX 3000 series gets significantly better performance versus last gen. And while yes, it does draw significantly more power, at the same price as last gen, the 3080 is an amazing GPU. Of course, we still don't know about AMD's offerings, so it is hard for me to say for sure, but I will say that they may be running out quickly, so as of now, I would definitely put these as a buy. And I'll also say that I'm going to have affiliate links down in the description. And even if you end up just clicking it today, I do believe if you end up going, as long as you're on the same browser and everything, if you end up going tomorrow, I'm pretty sure we'll still get that kickback. So definitely try and do that. It helps the channel out. So yeah, while I know this video was definitely a really long one, I had a lot of thoughts jambling around in my head about this that I wanted to discuss. And of course, let me know what you think about the 3080 down in the comments below. And if you liked the video, please subscribe. And as always, have a great day.